welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and tonight we come back to our discussion on the end of days and the imminent return of Jesus. This is part 6 of that discussion, and it's we could really just base our whole podcast around this one subject, I think, Jerry, because more and more things just keep happening each and every day, and especially lately with the fire in Maui. There's a once in a lifetime hurricane in California, as well as an earthquake just happened out there. And actually, here in North Carolina, where I live, just last week, we're filming this on August 23rd. Just last week, there were two earthquakes in North Carolina. And it just, each day you just keep hearing about these natural events. And Jesus talks about it in Matthew 24. He talks about how there's going to be earthquakes and there's going to be, oh, here I go blanking on the stuff again. Earthquakes, famine. Uh, he talks about plagues, and he talks about the natural occurrences, the earthquakes, and the things that go along with that as birth pains.
Hmm.
And they really, really seem to be ramping up lately, especially with, I say once in a lifetime hurricane. I think it was like 86 or 89 years since the last hurricane hit California. But I know it was a tropical storm by the time it made landfall, but it was still a hurricane out there on the West Coast, which is unheard of. And, 89 years, I guess that is once in a lifetime, because the lifespan isn't nearly what it used to be. But it's just it all points to the culmination, and we've talked about this on this channel before, the culmination of everything and the birth pains and the imminent return of Jesus. Basically, is what it's all leading up to. And tonight we come with a warning. Well, if you're a believer, it's not a warning at all, and none of this should surprise you unless you just haven't been paying attention at all. But it should excite you as a believer. But if you're lost, then this should definitely be a warning for you that you need to get right with the Lord before it's too late. Because, during the tribulation, we've talked about this too. It's not going to be impossible to get saved, and it's not going to be impossible to get to heaven, but it's going to be much, much harder than it is now before Jesus returns. So that's why we want to do this topic. That's why we want to push this subject, and that's why we want to put out there that the time is now to get right with the Lord, because once Jesus comes and once the tribulation starts, it's going to be much. It's not impossible, but it's going to be much, much harder to get saved.
Yeah, there's a lot of small things that go along with that. I mean, even what you just described, if you sit down and really think about it, because it's very easy, even for Christians, to just put it out of your mind. Even when you see all the stuff, and make no mistake, it's not normal. The things that we're seeing are not normal. If I think you have to be in denial to see what's going on. The number of fires. I mean, we talked about the fire in Hawaii, which was mind-boggling in many ways, but that's just one of many. It's also going on right now in British Columbia. It's going on in a lot of places around. They've got fires going on in Turkey. We remember there was fires in Australia, just all over the place. There's fires going on. And the chart that I saw just today, a graph, I should say, of the normal number of fires, and then what we've had just to this point this year, was the normal number. It went in at like a fairly reasonable angle, going up, and then 2023 the line went almost straight up. It was just unbelievable how many more fires that we're having, and that's just one thing. But not to get too far down the rabbit hole, because this subject is so, um, like I was going to say, what you were talking about the details. It's so easy to blow this off and to be in denial. But the fact of the matter is, at some point, this is going to happen. Like you just said, it is coming. We've said that many times on this channel, probably to the point of being redundant. But the Lord, and you did good to point out quote the Lord on this because he makes it clear it's going to come like a trap. And we all know from watching the cartoons and whatnot that a trap snaps shut very, very quickly. For those of us who are old enough to remember 9/11, you can very easily imagine how in the course of one day, the entire world can change because it did on that day. And I remember that morning, none of us were expecting that. I remember exactly where I was. And by sundown, it was a different world. So even though it doesn't happen every day, thank the Lord, it can happen and it will happen. It is coming. And the reason why we know it's coming is because all these signs tell us that it's coming. The Lord made it very clear that when you see all these things happening, that's when you know that his appearing is at hand. It's what he says. Look to the heavens, your redemption draweth nigh. And if it was just the fires, we could just chalk it up to being dry. Or if it was just wild and crazy UFO stuff everywhere you look, then we could just say, well, it must be a fad, a pop culture fad. If it was just the fact that they're going to a one world currency, we could say, well, maybe it's just a financial shift. If it was just a really bad bout of corruption, government corruption, which we're seeing around the world, we could just say, well, it's just a downtime for governments right now. But all these things are happening at the same time. And that's just a brief overview. I don't have a list out here of all the things that are happening when it comes to the earthquakes. I mean, nothing is more off the charts right now than the earthquakes. You mentioned the ones in North Carolina. There are 5.0 and 4.0 earthquakes all over the place every day, like we've never seen before. It's off the charts. So it's at some point you sit down and you think, and with this kind of thing, you have to really think and get alone and sit and spend some time and think and try to envision this happening, because it is going to happen. And like I've said before on this channel, for people who have Christians who have waited on the Lord to do something and it took a while and then it happened, it's very easy to understand the process and to see it happening again. I can understand if somebody hasn't been through that, where it's very easy to say, oh, well, it's never going to occur. But it is coming. I don't know when. I don't know if it's what year it is. I just don't know. And I don't think it's really responsible to name dates because the Lord makes it clear that he is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. That's pretty clear. I'm coming at an hour that you do not think I will. And so I think it's healthy to prepare yourself by just sitting and thinking and focusing and trying to envision what it's going to be like when it happens, because in an instant it's going to occur. And when it does, you're going to fall into one of two camps. Either those like Jeff and I, not because we're holier than anybody else, because we'll be the first to tell you we're not. Maybe we're more excited because we need the Lord's grace more than other people. But my reaction is going to be very similar. We were talking about baseball earlier, very similar to what players do when they win the World Series or when they win the Stanley Cup. That's going to be my reaction when it occurs. Or you may find yourself on the opposite end and be at a loss. And we do not know how, when the rapture does occur, we don't know how clear it will be. With all of this, it's not as cut and dry as some people make it out. It's very possible, as some people have theorized, that the rapture will be kind of clouded in a lot of natural upheaval, to the point where it may not be readily apparent that a lot of people have disappeared. If power is knocked out from an earthquake that Revelations describes as happening at the same time, if the internet goes down, if there's chaos everywhere, it may not be really clear right away that a lot of people have vanished. We don't know. If there's some sort of UFO disclosure that occurs at the same time, people may not really think about the rapture if they're being told that all these Christians were removed by these aliens that they see on television, which aren't aliens at all, which we talked about. So there's a lot of nuances to this subject that are there if you think about them. But a lot of times we just kind of hop, skip, and jump and think that it's going to be this way or that way, and we don't really perceive what actually may occur. And we don't know the level of horror that will descend on planet Earth when the church is gone, because we haven't seen the earth without the church and without the Holy Spirit indwelling the church, the great restrainer. So when that's gone, we just don't know. As bad as it looks now with the social upheaval and the lawlessness that we see, you can only imagine what it would be when the Christian element is gone. So without trying to monopolize all the time, that's just something that as we get closer, for me personally, the the um, shock or the surprise that we're actually there has worn off, and now I'm beginning to think more about some of the details, because it is coming. I mean, it is, and we've been doing this for over a year now. We've been talking about this subject for over a year, and in that year, it has not backed off one bit. It has only intensified. And Jeff, as you said, it has intensified since we discussed this a couple months ago, and to the point where I don't know how much you follow it, but it is a very common subject in a lot of Christian circles, and more all the time. Now, some Christians are ignoring it, which is fine. Like we've said before, if you're not interested in the end time, it doesn't say that you have to be interested in the end times. It does say to watch. The Lord commands us to watch for his return, but it's, to each his own. It's not my place to really say if a Christian, how much they should be into prophecy, because it can be, tedious at times. It can be frustrating at times, but
It's a scary thought to think about. As bad as the world is now, and as bad as some of the things, the evil that is going on in the world right now, to think about that without the church, and how much worse, because it seems really bad out there right now. But I mean, just I never really even thought about how much worse it's going to get when the church is gone until you said that. And it's like, man, I look around now and it's like, how much worse can things get? And it really just hit me when you said that yeah, it can get much worse, and it will get much worse, because when God pulls the church, when he pulls the Holy Spirit off the earth, we're or they're, well, not us, not we, but they, whoever's left behind, is going to be in for it. And that's,
right.
if that's not enough to scare you to get right with Jesus today, I don't know what else is, unless of course you're just scoffing and not believing, which you're entitled to do, but you're going to find out real quick one day soon. It seems like with everything that's going on that you picked the wrong side. But going back to what you were saying about it could happen at any time, I remember you saying on this channel, I forget exactly what we were talking about. It probably was one of the five previous parts of this discussion. You talked about how sporting events would be going on, people would be living their normal lives, watching sports, cheering for sports. I don't mean to make it all about sports, but they're going about their normal lives, going to work, and it just happens. And like you said, it's like a snare, like a trap, and it's going to happen just like that. And I'm I'm pretty excited. Part of me is it's really starting to not that it wasn't hitting home and settling upon me before, but the way things are ramping up, it's like you said, just in the last year since we started talking about this, since we started this channel and started talking about this, is so much more is happening, especially in the last just the last 3 or 4 months.
Oh yeah.
And it's really starting to hit home with me that, this is it. We're living in the
Yeah.
end of days. We are going to get to see the return of Jesus. And that part of me, well, part of me seeing how bad things are getting out there gives me a little trepidation about being in this world. But then, the majority, I'd say like 99.999% of me is excited that I'm going to get to hear that trumpet and see Jesus come through those clouds, and
Right.
I'm going to get to go up into the sky and meet him, which
Yeah.
is what it says in the Bible. And I just, it's like you said about it, visualizing that happening is, it's really hard to, I don't want to say believe, that's not the right word. It's really hard to see these things playing out
Right.
because, we are just humans. We have our tiny, feeble little human minds as opposed to God's all knowing, all omniscient presence. It's hard for us to see these things because the Christian faith is based on believing, not seeing.
Right.
So at least for me, it's hard for me to see in my mind all of this playing out because I can't comprehend it. I can't understand it. Only God can. And when you talked about visualizing it happening, and that points to a lot of people like turning their heads and scoffing at it and not believing it's upon us because we can't really comprehend what's about to happen. We know it's about to happen. We can read about it in the Bible, but at the same time, it's just we're only human, and we can only perceive and we can only understand so much of God and
Right.
his way of things. Am I saying that correct? I don't want to say anything wrong here. Is that
No, no, exactly. Yeah.
so? When you said that about visualizing it happening, it makes me, that I can see why people scoff at it, and I can see why people aren't ready to accept the truth. But I don't know. It's like every single day I hear about earthquakes, and that's the main thing Jesus mentions in Matthew
Yeah.
24. And
Yeah.
if you read Matthew chapter 24, it's all about the end and all about
Yeah.
what's going to happen right before Jesus returns. And it's just shocking going through Matthew 24 and just like taking, like, for instance, Jesus mentions wars. Just since 1900, there have been like 6 or 7 major wars.
Oh, oh yeah.
I was I was listening to Adrian Rogers not too long ago, and he said more people have died in the last century from war than all the rest of history combined. And then Jesus talks about plagues. Just since 1900, there's been 3 outbreaks of the flu. There's been COVID-19. There's been the HIV/AIDS since the 80s, and that's marked as currently ongoing. COVID's marked as currently ongoing. There was an outbreak in Russia just since 1900 of I want to say typhoid, but I'm not sure that's exactly correct. But there was an outbreak in Russia, and people, when you say plague, people want to think bubonic plague, the Black Death, which has been happening throughout history. But just since 1900, there's been so many more plagues. I'm not more than all the rest of history combined, but it's really ramping up. And famine. We've talked about famine before. Jesus also mentions famines, and you would think that in this day and age, in 2023, we would have figured out a way to feed everybody in the world. We would have not cured, but conquered, or
Right.
come up with a solution to world hunger. But there are people starving all around the world,
Oh,
and it's getting worse. It's not getting
yeah.
any better. It's getting worse. So, and then I just thought of another one. The gospel. He says the gospel will reach every nation. You've specifically discussed this before, and you've said that it doesn't say that it will reach every single person, but it will reach all nations. And
Right.
it's readily available in every nation through whatever variety, through in-person preaching, through missionaries, through the internet. The Bible is available, TV in what countries that have it. So every nation, every country has the gospel, has access to the gospel,
Right.
can the gospel can reach them if they so
Right.
choose to seek it out. So everything that he talks about in Matthew 24 has either come to pass, or it's getting ready to, or it's happening, it's playing out right before our very eyes, like with the earthquakes, with wars, with the famine, everything. It's just it's crazy how, and he talks about it, doesn't he? He talks about it coming to a point, doesn't he? He talks about it ramping up as birth pains,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Just in the last, like, I don't even want to say in the last 5 years, but in the last 6 months,
Right.
is it's just crazy how much keeps happening. And if you're in tune with with that chapter, Matthew 24, and you're keeping an eye out and you're watching like God tells us to, you see this stuff starting to play out right before our very eyes.
It's like you said, it's just like a childbirth. It gets worse as it goes along. It doesn't get better. Before the birth occurs, the pain intensifies. It doesn't let off. And it's we've had, I tend to subscribe, and it's not 100% fact. It's just how I see it. I tend to look at it the way you just described, to where 1900 for me was the beginning of the birth pangs. I think 1900 was very significant. I think there were things that transpired around that time, and I think you had 20th century was the century of warfare. You also had more Christians killed for their faith in the 20th century than all the centuries leading up to that combined. You certainly had massive, massive famines in the Soviet Union and in China and in Africa during the 20th century. Famines that probably would rival anything in history, millions dying. And so I see the 20th century as being the birth pangs, and it has come to this now where we are in the final moments of labor. And one of the things that the reason why that we like to point out that it's important to watch is because Jesus makes it clear that it's going to take everybody by surprise, even Christians. Now, it does say that we are not in darkness, that we should be caught off guard, but we don't know the exact day or the hour. So we can't pinpoint. And so what I'm trying to get at here is it can't get but so bad before even non-Christians begin to realize something is up. What I'm saying, you can't have but so many signs occur and hints occur before your person that you're about to spring the surprise party on is no longer surprisable, that they are expecting it. And I know non-Christians, I have to mention Steve Ishdahl because it's our channel and I always do that. He said just this past week, and he said it several times, he's a non-Christian. Like most people, he tips his cap. He mentions prayer and this, that, and the other, but he's not a believer. And he was talking this week about how things are just different. It's not sustainable, that this cannot continue, that the world is off kilter. And he doesn't mean the axis. He meant, he doesn't say the world has shifted in its orbit. He was saying that everything is just a mess, and to the point where he said he didn't know, what's causing this. What is causing this? Who's doing this to us? To quote a famous line from Thin Red Line. And so it's very important to remember for people who are sitting on the fence and thinking they have time to live their best life now and maybe try to get fire insurance right before he appears, that the closer we get down this hallway, we're much closer than you think, because it is going to happen before most people are awake to it. And more, even non-Christians are starting to realize that something is amiss. That tells us that in order to catch people by surprise, it's going to have to happen before too terribly long. I don't know how long that is. I really don't. I have guesstimates, and they're just that. I certainly don't have any dates. I don't have any feasts, Jewish feasts. I don't have any months that I specifically think that it's going to occur. I think that when Jesus said that he's going to come at a time that you don't think he will, I think it's just that. It'll be a time when nobody is thinking that it's going to happen, and then it's just going to, out of the blue, it's going to occur. And like you said, Jeff, it's very hard to envision. I like to use the analogy of the Holocaust. It was very difficult for the people to envision that was coming, because they had never seen anything like it before. The world had never seen anything like the Holocaust. Yes, there had been persecutions. There had been pogroms. The Jews have been persecuted for a long time. But many people, when that began to happen, were able to kind of not blow it off, but they were able to encourage themselves and others by saying, listen, we're just going to get moved around, deported, whatever, like we had before. We'll have to start over somewhere else, and there may be some rough times, and we'll get through it, because that's always what has happened in the past. No one could really anticipate what was coming. This is much the same. It's very difficult to anticipate when you haven't seen this before. We've never seen anything in the history of the earth like what is coming. And we know it's coming because the Bible says, and the Bible is not wrong. And it's it comes down to, and I guess it's a roll of the dice. If you don't believe in the Bible, like we've said here before, and you want to take a chance and roll the dice and risk it, then you certainly can. But it can't be laid at Jeff's feet or at my feet that you weren't warned, because that's exactly just like Noah. Not that we're holding ourselves up as being equal to Noah, but just like he warned people during his day, just like um, I don't know if Lot warned the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. It doesn't say that he did, but certainly you want to talk about destruction coming upon people unawares. They weren't expecting what happened. And the Bible compares the last generation to Sodom and Gomorrah a lot. And so it's it's challenging even for Christians. For Christians, the bigger challenge, I think, mentioning Lot like I did, is what Lot went through, because the Bible says that righteous man felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by the lawless deeds of those around him. And if you're a Christian who hasn't felt grieved by the wickedness that is celebrated in this country now, then you got some soul searching to do, because the spirit inside of you should really grieve at what's being done and celebrated, because it's not of the Lord. And so a lot of Christians that I know, all the Christians that I know it's a challenge. It's tough, because I never thought that I would see the things. My dad, like I've mentioned before, my dad passed away in 2006, not that long ago. And if he were to come back right now and he and I were to be, riding in the truck through the country, and I would update him on everything that's happened since 2006, he would probably ask me to stop the truck so he could get out and dry heave. He wouldn't believe it. Starting from 2008 right on up to the current time, it's just it's sanity. So
It's funny you mention Sodom and Gomorrah, because I often say, like, half joking, not even half joking, that we're living in the second coming of Sodom and Gomorrah.
right,
And I know you've mentioned before that was a an example, Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, of what is going to happen in the
yeah,
end of days.
the Bible
And
says that.
yes, and just that's what we're living in. It's kind of hard to fathom. I sit back and I think about it, even right now, just then when it hit me. That's what we're living in. Sodom and Gomorrah is going on all around us, all over the world. It's not even just two cities. It's not even just this country. It's happening everywhere.
Right,
And everything that Jesus has said in Matthew 24 is coming to pass. That's one thing I forgot to mention, is that the persecution of Christians.
right,
They're being killed in Muslim countries. They're being killed in India. That was surprising when you mentioned that earlier this year,
yeah,
that Christians are being killed in India, because you never hear about stuff like that happening there.
right,
And I'm sure it's going on in other places too. But just think about the mockery that Christianity receives, the hate that is poured into attacking it. The trying to discredit the Bible, trying to discredit Christians. We've talked about on this channel before how one of the enemy's favorite pastimes is being able to trip up Christians,
yeah,
having people ask them questions, hard questions that they may not be prepared to answer, or they just don't have the answers for, because they don't know. Because like I just mentioned a little while ago, we can only comprehend and understand so much.
right,
And just the it's the most attacked religion in the world. And it's funny because other religions hate certain groups of people, and those groups of people celebrate those other religions.
right.
We're
Yeah, I
we're
know.
we're told to accept certain other religions, but if you mention Christianity, you should they come at you with a ferocity like no other. It's just it's bizarre, but it's not bizarre, and it's not surprising to me. I know it's not surprising to you, and it's probably not surprising to a lot of Christians tuning in. But it's the most attacked, the most hated religion in the world, and with good reason. Why wouldn't it be? The devil
Right.
is afraid of God. He's powerless against God. And so are his minions. So are the demons, the fallen angels. The whole side of evil is powerless against God. It's like when you mentioned John Ramirez, right? That's his name.
Hmm. Yeah.
How somebody paid him, people used to pay him to put curses on other people and kill
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And he tried to do that to one person, and God let the devil know, leave this person alone. And you said that was the point that John Ramirez realized he
Yeah.
was on the losing side, because the devil who he spoke to, just like you and I converse with God, the devil told him to leave that person alone. And that's when it
Right.
clicked. It's like, you know, I'm on the losing team here
Yeah.
because if this entity that I worship is all powerful, he's bowing down to God.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't Christianity be the most attacked religion when they're powerless against God? I mean, we've discussed this before too. Either the devil has convinced himself that he's going to win, or that he has a chance of winning.
Right.
And I mean, he's the king of deception. So maybe he's deceived himself, but all of that just points to him wanting to discredit. And I think a lot of it too goes into him wanting to take as many souls away from God as possible.
Sure.
And if he can drag millions or billions down into hell with him, he's going to do it just despite God, just despite Christianity. So I forget how I got off on this little tangent, but it's all
No, it's true
about
though.
it's all about trying to discredit Christianity so he can, maybe he's fooled himself into winning. If he thinks he can discredit Christianity enough, he can actually win when
Sure.
Jesus returns. Or maybe he knows he's going to lose, and if he can discredit Christianity and attack it like he is, he can pull as many souls down into hell with him when he's put there for all eternity. But it all goes back to Christianity being the target of the enemy. It's got a huge target on its back where no other faith or religion is even comes close. Doesn't even come close. The Jewish people have a reasonable gripe about that, but
Oh yeah.
Christianity just, if you look around and you just see the hate and how much people they snarl at it, and they just angry.
Right.
People get angry. It's the ferocity. I know I said that before, but the ferocity in which people attack Christianity is just, it all points to what Jesus said about it being us being persecuted, and how it's going to tie into the end of times. And that is another thing that's just getting worse, along with the earthquakes and the famines, and all the other natural disasters, and the everything else. Like you said, just since 1900, more Christians have been killed. And Adrian Rogers mentioned that too when I was listening to him. He was preaching on Matthew 24. More Christians have been killed since 1900 than any other time period in history. And it all just points to the birth pains. It all points to what Jesus said in Matthew 24 about the end coming and what's going to happen leading up to that.
And one of the things too that has everyone kind of a flutter right now, and we may have mentioned this on one of our other videos. I can't remember right now. We've covered a lot, but it's fairly recent development, so I doubt we've covered it in detail. But that is this meeting that is next month in September, the UN meeting, where they're going to go over the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's 17 these goals that the UN set forth in 2015 that are designed to eradicate climate change and hunger and inequality, and all this stuff here is supposed to make the world a perfect place and usher in utopia. And apparently these SDGs, as they're referred to, are not progressing or making the transformation that they originally intended it to. Or in other words, according to the UN, we're not making enough progress. and we haven't since 2015. So what they want to do is to meet in September and to require everyone to double down and to form a 7-year covenant or treaty that will require everyone, which is usually code for the United States, to double down and do a lot more to ensure that the 2030 agenda, which is the year that they have set that all this nirvana shall be attained, to ensure that we'll get there on time. And the reason why this is significant is because you have a 7-year covenant that is being formed, but it's a strengthening of a previous covenant that was formed. And the term that Daniel uses is covenant with the many. And you can't find a better definition of the many than the United Nations. It's literally the many. So this has a lot of Christians, including myself, our antenna way up when I heard this. At the same time, you have BRICS, which is another organization, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that are looking to replace the dollar with a gold-backed currency. There's 5 nations, but they want to increase it. And they've indicated they want to increase it to 10 nations. And others in BRICS are saying, no, we don't want to increase it at all. So that's another potential, because we know the Antichrist will take over a 10-nation kingdom. But that could come or go. We just don't know. But the UN thing, for my money, is a major alarm bell because of this one thing. How many times can you expect there to be a 7-year covenant formed that is actually a strengthening of a prior covenant? That's not a normal circumstance. Just a 7-year covenant is one thing. Okay, I think it was a few years back that the Pope was talking about wanting to make a 7-year covenant, and a 7-year treaty is not unheard of. But for it to be specifically a strengthening of a prior treaty, which the Bible uses the term a confirmation of a 7-year treaty with the many, and a lot of people feel that this is the Antichrist that is affirming this treaty. I think a very careful study of Daniel chapter 9, that where this is talked about, if you go by what, and have I mentioned this before? Have I gone over this? I'm not going to go into great detail at all because I know it might bore some people, but I think if you look at it as it's laid out in the context, it does not indicate that this treaty will be formulated by the Antichrist. The way I read it, it will be something that is pushed or initiated by one of these supernatural entities, whether the fallen angel or whatnot. And we may not even see the individual who initiates this. So if people see it, they say, well, there's no one person that stands out, so as being the Antichrist, so therefore this was just a non-event. I don't believe that at all, because we don't necessarily know that it's talking about the Antichrist. And maybe in the future, for those who are interested in the details of this, we can go into this in another episode where we can describe, what Daniel actually says, because you have to read prophecy and take it for what it actually says. And there's a lot of folks out there that they assume and they embellish. And it's very common you hear now that this 7-year treaty is a peace treaty with Israel. Okay, it doesn't say it's a peace treaty. It doesn't say it's with Israel. It says he confirms a covenant with the many. And so it's open to any number of things. And people say, yeah, but he breaks the covenant and the halfway through by entering the tabernacle and proclaiming himself as God. That's true. That does not in any way give us an idea as to what the covenant was about. It just simply means that he goes into the temple and proclaims himself as God. Doesn't mean that the covenant was about the temple. So there's a lot of inferring that goes along. I don't know if you remember that the Office episode where they're talking about what inferring and whatnot it means, and they're going back and forth about assuming and inferring, and you inferred, and then Michael
Right.
gets
Yeah. Yeah.
I always think about that when I think about the inferring. There's another word they're talking about too. It's funny, and so anyhow, that is what really has. And again, you take this meeting that they're going to have in September, and you you put this up against with the backdrop of everything else that we've been talking about tonight, and, and it's, you know, if this isn't what we think it is, and I know that it is, it's, this would almost be teasing Christians to have something look this much like what is described in Scripture and it not be. It was, Jesus didn't tell us that there would be a bunch of false alarms where it would look exactly like all the things he mentioned, but it actually wouldn't happen. He never said that. He said, when you see these things taking place, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And they're all hung up on this 2030. I don't know what it is about 2030, but they see that year as something magical. And I do not know what it is, but the Davos people and the one world types and the UN folks and even some of the environmentalists are hung up on 2030. They see that as the drop dead date that this has to be done, and the date which, according to Klaus Schwab, will all, quote, own nothing and be happy, unquote. So they have a lot of bad things planned by 2030, and they're dead set on making it happen. And there's some speculation that some of the stuff, the disasters that we're seeing, are somehow, related to this. And I don't know. I admit that, I'm open-minded. I listen to things that are going on. There are strange things that are happening, but like we've said on here before, even though people might think, well, these guys don't have any inhibitions at all, they just believe in anything they hear. We actually don't. The things we've discussed in this channel, we have come to these conclusions by looking at the evidence, whether it's cryptids or end times or whatever, or hearing from the Lord, whatever the case may be. And so with some of these conspiracy theories, and like I've heard somebody say, that used to be a bad word, but anymore the conspiracy theorists have a pretty good track record of being borne out as being right. Nevertheless, I still do not automatically jump to that. There's some of that that's going on now, and these people may be right. They may be correct in the end, but I'd rather err on the side of caution. I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and say, oh no, well, there's nothing to this, because it does appear that there are people around the world in certain places. We know in Australia it was the case, and we know in California it's been the case, where people are deliberately setting these fires. And some of them may just be pyromaniacs, all acting on their own, as people will do. But the fact that it so conveniently fulfills a certain agenda that is being pushed as a religion nowadays is enough to make you suspicious. Is there any way that people could benefit from a lot of these fires? And there most certainly is. Now, you can't, from what we can tell, you can't manufacture earthquakes, although perhaps you can. I mean, I don't put anything past them. But we certainly know the government can create rain squalls and rain, and they can create, certainly easily create, but any fool can create fire. So, but again, I'm not getting on here and saying that that's what has happened, because I don't know. And until I know, I'm not going to accuse anybody of anything, because it all may be 100% natural. Fires do happen, but there's a lot of weird stuff going on. There's no getting around that. It's not
Right.
pretty, not pretty.
Another thing that 2030 sticks out about is AI. We talked about AI in an episode, artificial
Oh yeah.
intelligence, and they I forget exactly what it was, but they were talking about how by 2030, certain developments with AI is supposed to take shape. I forget exactly what it
Oh,
was, but
you won't need a cell phone because you'll have the
that's
chips
it.
put into your brain.
That's
Yeah.
it. And that's just another thing that they're planning by 2030. So
Yep.
it's weird how 2030 is this year that everything's supposed to magically just, like you said, they're trying to build a utopia. And
Right.
I, you know, it's too much of a coincidence. And like we've said before, we don't believe in coincidence. Just like the specifics of this treaty, this 7-year treaty or covenant, the specifics of it match up way too much for it to be a coincidence.
Right.
And it's not. I mean, like we said, we don't believe in coincidence. it can't be ignored. It just matches up too perfectly. It matches up too perfectly with the covenant of the many that Daniel spoke of. It almost matches exactly. So,
And think
especially,
about this.
go
Think
ahead.
about this for a second. We're 7 years out from the Revelation 12 sign that occurred in 2017. So we're exactly 7 years out from that, which also puts us 7 years shy of 2030. That's why a lot of Christians feel that this fall, and I'm not saying that this fall is, the drop dead time, but a lot of Christians feel that this fall is going to be, specifically September, because if there's any month that seems to always rear its head in these theories, some of which are motivated by dreams, which are credible dreams, and others are probably just motivated by study of Jewish feasts and whatnot. But September comes up as being the one, and that's why people feel that the 2013 and 2023 is significant. And we also have a lot of Christians, respected Christians, who have said that the Lord has indicated to them that something large is coming this fall. Now, we said on the last episode, I'll shut up here in a second. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we said in the last episode that we have to be very careful. And I wanted to reiterate, I didn't make many notes for this video tonight, but one thing I did put is to reiterate once again, because I've really noticed in the past week that you have to be very careful, because almost every video, it seems like now, is God told me this, God showed me that. And I can tell you for a fact that a lot of these people are genuine and they may be hearing something. And also a lot of them may be genuinely deceived. In other words, they're not bad people, but they're hearing from the wrong source. And it can happen. It doesn't mean they're not Christians. I've been battling the enemy since we've been doing this show, talking about hearing from the Lord. The enemy has made it his effort to try to trip me up on this. And I've had, thankfully, by using discernment, I've been able to uncover his, but it's been a couple times now where I've heard things that ended up not being the Lord. So it can happen. We talked last episode about John Ramirez and his aunt, that she could get in there. She was a master of deceiving people and making them think that it was. So, um, we said in the last, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't discount everybody that says they heard from the Lord, but you really need to go with folks who have proven track records. We mentioned some in the last episode. Also want to mention real quick that I misspoke in the last episode. And when I said that Kent Christmas made a major prophecy, and I actually said, when I listened to it later, I said 2000. It was the year 2000. He said it. That wasn't right at all. It was 2020. It was January of 2020 when he said that in a few months, something major is going to shake the earth. And of course, 3 months later, we had COVID happen. But I misspoke and said 2000, which would have been 20 years earlier. So if anybody hears that video, that's a misspeak on my part. I cringed when I heard myself say that. But anyhow, I'll shut up. And I just wanted to remind people that it's okay to listen. And there's respected people like Kent Christmas and others who have said, Randy Kay and Perry Stone have said they feel in their spirit like there's something very big coming, and it's coming this fall. They didn't say what, and you don't have to go and panic, but you just register the stuff in the back of your mind and you pay attention. You wait and see, and it may be nothing. We've had alarms before and alerts, and we waited and we thought that it was going to be around, and then nothing happened. So you log it away and say, okay, nothing happened. Sometimes things do happen and you just don't see it right away. So
Yeah, but back to what I was saying is like this UN meeting and this treaty that they're gonna, the 7 year treaty that they're gonna renew. It just matches up too perfectly with what Daniel said, and it just there's there's no coincidence when it comes to the Bible and to prophecy. And we've said many times we don't believe in coincidence. So especially, I mean, if this was happening and all of this stuff, the earthquakes, the famines, the killing of Christians, if all of that wasn't ramping up and this happened, it would still probably raise alarms, but at the same time, it probably wouldn't be as significant as it is in this moment, in this time when everything is converging. Everything's coming to that point, and then right, as things are getting worse and worse and worse, here's this 7 year treaty or covenant that is a renewal of an old one, and it's not a coincidence. It's not, because the Bible says this is all going to happen, and I just, with I believe that's what it is, the covenant of the many, that meeting in September. Because how can you look at it's like you said, you take these things individually, you probably dismiss them as this or that. But when you put it all together and with everything that's happening, like I said, just in the last 6 months, just in the last year, and then you don't even have to go back 5 years, but you can. You can go back 10 years, because right around 2016 is when things really started ramping up. And it's only getting worse. It's like it's the snowball effect, and it's just more and more and more, and it's all coming together. When you put it all together with this, covenant that's about to happen, how can you sit there and look at it and say, how can you think it's not? How can you sit there and look at it and be like, that's not what Daniel's talking about? I mean, there's maybe it's not. We don't know, but it certainly looks that way, and I believe it to be. But you mentioned the Revelation sign back in, you said,
Mhm.
2017.
Right.
What was that exactly?
That was a astrological, um, astronomical sign that occurred in September of 2017. If you read the um, Revelation 12, chapter 12, it starts off talking about a sign that occurred in the heavens that John sees. And it's a woman that's bathed in the sun, and she's giving birth. And there is a dragon that is at her feet. And that sign in the stars played out amongst the constellations exactly in September. I want to say September 17th of 2017, but it may have been 21st. But it was in September. I wasn't even aware of it at the time. It was shortly after that big eclipse that we had. And this was actually a few months before the Bethlehem star. I don't know if you remember, but the Bethlehem star also showed up. So we've had signs in sun and in stars for sure, which is what Jesus said, there will be sign in sun and moon and stars. We've had all those. And it was amazing if you get a chance to look into the Revelation 12 sign and how it, even the stars moved inside the female constellation like a womb, and then actually the stars moved out just like it was being born. It was amazing. It was one of these things where it had not ever happened, or hadn't happened in thousands of years since before John's time. And he called it, and it happened in 2017. And many people saw that as the warning shot that the Lord gave for the watchmen, that this is the beginning. This is what and a lot of watchmen at that time really were excited. They thought even that it might even have been a signal that the rapture was coming very soon. But it actually was. And what's interesting about it, they look now, and when Noah got onto the ark, he didn't immediately shut the door and float away. They got on the ark and they waited 7 days, and that gave mankind a chance. Anybody who wanted to come and get on the ark was free to, and not one single person did. But they were on there with the door open. And so people have theorized that what we've seen the 7 years since the 2017 was 7 years for people to get right and repent, because the end is coming, and the door is going to be shut, and it's going to be just like the days of Noah, which is what Jesus said. As it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the coming of the Son of Man. And that is a phrase, a statement that is pregnant with all kinds of meaning. And so that's what that was. It was a pretty amazing sign. You can go on, and I would be careful which ones that you look at. There's one that deals with the sign. It's a Mormon site that is that really gets into some of the Mormon stuff. But there's other ones on there, the Revelation 12, that explain it. And when you get to see all that happened, it's amazing. I've never known much about the constellations, but when you see it, it definitely 100% was what John described.
And that's right around the time where we started to say things started ramping up in 2016, and a year later that happens.
The a lot of the folks feel, a lot of the watchmen feel that the blood moons that occurred in 2014 were really the kickoff. Yeah, the blood moons that occurred, there was a lot said about those in 2014, 2013, 2014, maybe even 2012. There was some. I remember hearing about them a lot. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it at the time. And then after that you had, so that was the that was signs in the moon, and then you had the Revelation 12, which was signs in the sun and the stars, and you also had the Bethlehem star, which showed up as well that one Christmas. And so there has definitely been a lot of signs in the heavens that Jesus said would be occurring. And like you said, you got the earthquakes going on. You have all sorts of, but what we have to really look for now, and this is because I heard somebody the other day, somebody I really like, and they said that all the signs are in full throat and are going on right now. But I don't know if that's 100% true. Most of them are, but there's one that I'm not convinced is going on. It may be going on. I don't know. But it says there will be war in heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And Jesus says this in Matthew 24 and also in Luke. I forget the chapter that Luke deals with this. But the Lord describes that there will be a war in the heavenlies, and that the very sight of it will scare mankind. And we haven't had that yet. And I believe that that will be the sign that'll be literally right before. It may even happen as the rapture occurs, because there's a lot of speculation that the stars, we know the stars falling are the angels being cast out of heaven. And there's another section in Peter that I'd like to talk about in another episode. And this is something that you never hear anybody talking about. I went back about a month ago and broke down what Peter was talking about, because like Michael Heiser used to say, the strange verses usually have significant meaning. The stranger a verse is, the more. And in Second Peter, there's a couple of verses in there that really kind of run the opposite direction of a lot of other Bible and it's always really made me wonder. And so I did kind of a deep dive into it in the early morning hours about a month ago. And I think what I came up with is pretty amazing. And I'm also amazed that it never gets talked about, ever, anywhere. I can't believe this section, which basically indicates that exactly what Jesus is talking about war in the heavens, is not ever referenced. And I don't know how it's managed to be overlooked, but I was thinking that it might be interesting to some of our folks here to hear this, because I think it's significant. So maybe one of our next episodes will probably, if you wanted to, go over the Daniel chapter 9 and then this Second Peter thing. And we can, or we maybe or maybe not, it doesn't matter. Either way is fine. But it was something that I think that's the next thing that we really are waiting on. That's the next big sign. Also, the raging of the sea. Jesus talks about that. We're seeing some of that, but I don't know if we have seen an unusual amount of raging of the sea and the ocean and the waves, it says. We may see that this fall. Let's hope not. I hate hurricanes with a passion. I love the hockey team, but I can't stand the actual event. And I hope we don't have hurricanes, but the Lord did say there would be raging in the sea and the waves. And while we've had tons of earthquakes and fires and volcanoes going off even now, we have not seen a lot of, like, we had that one big tsunami back in the early 2000s that killed 200,000 people in Indonesia. But since then, and we've had the one in Japan that was bad, but those have been a while. I don't think anybody's really looking to the heavens for fear because of those that occurred decades ago. So there's another one there that I'm keeping my eye out for to see if something occurs. If we start seeing some tsunamis going off around the world, then that's going to be something.
And what causes tsunamis? Earthquakes on the ocean floor. So
right, yeah.
That's all I had for this one.
Me too.
It's not hard. It's like Jerry said earlier. We're not special. We're not better than anybody. We're not on the same level as even I was going to say biblical prophets or the disciples or anybody like that. Even prophets of this day and age, we're not even on that level. We're just two regular guys who have just done the research and we've read the Bible. So you can find this knowledge too. And if I'm sure if you go and read Matthew chapter 24 and you look at what's happening in the world today, it's probably going to shock you, or at least get your attention if it hasn't already. So I would encourage everybody who sees this to go out and read Matthew chapter 24 and see what Jesus himself says, because this is all coming from Jesus. It's not coming from me and Jerry. It's not even coming from Matthew. It's what Jesus says
Right.
about the end of days and what's going to happen, the birth pains leading up to his second coming. So, that's where I studied up on Matthew 24 before we did this episode. And it's amazing how when you apply it to everything that's happening with all the earthquakes, with all of the world events, and it's too much of a coincidence. And we don't believe in coincidence. So, it's just it lines up too perfectly. Like I said, with the covenant that's about to happen in September, everything that's happening, it just lines up too perfectly with what the Bible says about the end of days, to ignore it, or to sweep it away, or to scoff at it. You can scoff at us all you want to, but Jesus talks about everything that's happening right now. Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24. So you don't have to take it. You don't have to take our word for it, but Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 24, and I don't think I said Matthew chapter 24 enough, so I'll say it one more time. But
Which chapter is that again?
Matthew chapter 24. So go read that and line it up with everything we talked about here and everything that's going on and everything that's going to continue to happen. I'm sure every time every time we film one of the parts for this, the end of days and the imminent return of Jesus, something happens almost the very next day, and we're
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah,
we're going to do another part. So,
yeah.
we leave it open ended anyway. I'm sure with things ramping up the way they are, we'll come back with a part 7, but we might have to do a whole episode just on the covenant of the many, that
Yeah,
Daniel talks about, and the 2 verses that you said
yeah.
earlier. So we'll probably do those in upcoming episodes. If you didn't have anything else, I'll go ahead and close this out.
No, that's it. I think that people will find it interesting because there's quite a bit to that Daniel. There's 2 verses I mentioned. There's more than just what I said. There's some other stuff to it that I think is very interesting.
All right, so those will probably be our upcoming episodes. Thanks for tuning into this one. We don't do this for the views or the likes or to get as many subscribers as possible. We're not trying to monetize this channel. We just want to spread the word. We want to warn the lost, and we want to encourage believers. And everything that's happening in this world is scary, but if you look at it in perspective to the Bible and what Jesus says about the end of days and what's going to happen, my excitement overrides my fear. I look,
Right.
and it's like you said earlier. It's like Lot. You look at what's happening in the world and it pains you, but at the same time, my excitement for the end, my excitement that not just that the end is here and that Jesus is coming back, but that we'll get to see it. And God has put that
Yeah.
on us to talk about, and I feel like He's called me, especially lately. I just get the sense of urgency. I've been struck with the sense of urgency by the Holy Spirit, by God, to talk about the end of days, to warn people. I've just had it stirring within me, and that's one of the reasons why we started this channel. But it's really ramped up for me lately, personally, and that's why we talk about the things we do. That's what I'm getting at here. I'm not just rambling, but I'm lately I have been, Jerry. I've been just really ramped up to talk about the end of days and to warn people, to try to warn as many people as I can, and to call to action Christians. We need to be out there trying to save as many people as possible. We need to be out there spreading the gospel, and we need to be saving people from going to hell, because hell was not created, despite what the enemy will have you believe. Hell was not created for people. It was created for the devil and his army. So we need to be out there saving as many people as we can, warning as many people as we can. And that's another reason why we started this channel, to talk about this stuff, to talk about things that, some Christians shy away from, like cryptids and other stuff like that. But we just talk about what God puts on our hearts to talk about, and that's the reason why we do it. We don't want to be internet famous. We don't want to make money off this. You'll never find a store on our page selling $25 t-shirts. We talked about that in one of the recent episodes. So that's why we do it, and that's why we're here. So with that, I think I'll leave it there. And thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you at the next one. God bless.